Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 170, and I'm going to title it Lost Father, Gained Wife. It's not a story, this is a real life update. So, my father, who was, along with my mom, mostly my mom, and you'll hear why in a moment, was on the podcast back when it was basically a straight biography podcast, and they came on and talked about their lives and so on. And my dad even then had Parkinson's, and Parkinson's is one of those horrible diseases. It's chronic. You don't get better, you only get worse. It's also a spectrum disease, so it affects different people slightly differently. And it's very difficult to treat or cure because it does affect everyone differently. And, it's not well understood how every variation and variant and possible cause and everything else about Parkinson's happens in different people. So, in his case, he also ended up with dementia. They come together very commonly. Especially if you're older and you get Parkinson's, very often you get dementia as well, and it did happen in his case. And yeah, so he died right before my podcast last week. And if you heard the opening to it, I did sound a little weird, and that was why. I was sort of trying to put the moment aside as best I could and just get my podcast out, give myself a moment of peace as well. And yeah, it was just very difficult. My wife and I weren't really looking to wed as quickly as we did. Because of various things in our lives, we haven't even been able to live together properly. We just spend a lot of time at each other's houses and so on, but we don't usually live under the same roof, in that way. She's now on the same side of the state line as me now, Willow, which is great. And I've been really enjoying having her closer, and I'm pretty sure that, sooner rather than later we'll figure out a way to actually live under the same roof, and I'm really looking forward to that. But, because, we have a very complicated situation and so on, we weren't necessarily going to get married right away. We were planning actually on putting it off a couple of years, actually. But when my dad got sicker and sicker, and then when he was, when he found out he had dementia as well, we knew that time was running out, and if we waited 2 years, he would probably already be gone by then, or even if he survived, he might mentally not be there and not be able to actually, be there in any meaningful present way. So we moved it up, and we moved it up to September 15th, this last Tuesday. And we chose the 15th for a variety of reasons, but one of the most important emotionally for really both of us was that it was also my grandparents' anniversary. And you actually heard that story from my mom and dad, or if you want to, you can go back to that episode. And you'll find out that my mom's mom and dad, my maternal grandparents, were married during World War II, and they basically had like this whirlwind romance where they'd only gone on like a couple of dates. They barely knew each other, decided to get married. They got married in a church. Their witness was just some lady who was in church that day praying for her husband who was already overseas. And they never met her before. It was literally like that. And then they lived the rest of their lives together. It was very romantic and wonderful and all that. And so we decided to get married on their anniversary. And that was wonderful. We had a very small ceremony on Tuesday. It was lovely, though. Because of COVID, we had someone come in, do the ceremony for us. We sort of maintained social distancing. She wore a mask the whole time. We wore masks most of the time, except for when we were doing the ceremony, because we did it basically across the room, and then we put masks back on when we, were going to be closer to her again afterwards to do the paperwork and, do the actual documentation and all that. But it was hard, because we had moved up the wedding for Dad, and then to lose him just before the wedding was very difficult. And it's one of those, losing my father. He was an excellent person. He was just like one of those really solid, good people who, didn't have a bad thing to say about people. He really worked hard to, just sort of, he provided for his, it was one of those like old fashioned, like provide for his family. He was, he wanted to make sure his family was doing well. His wife was happy and all that. Because of that attitude, they pulled up roots and moved from San Jose up to Idaho, with, like very little notice, just because they kind of both fell in love with North Idaho. They did it without having any job prospects that they knew of at the time. My mom ended up getting a little bit fortunate in that a library position, which was her field, opened up. She joined the library system. And then my dad actually designed and co-built the house that we ended up living in for the next 10 years. And of course, it's still there. They just sold it and moved to a different house, which he also designed, although I don't believe he had much of a hand in actually building that one. And he's just like I say, a remarkable man that way. And he was, he had one of those qualities that's really not appreciated enough in society, in that he had a harder life emotionally than he then passed on. Like, you hear all about how, like, cruelty is sort of passed down from generation to generation. But it basically stopped in my dad's generation. Like, he had some pretty rough grandparents, and they were nice enough in some ways and whatever. And I'm not gonna say a whole bunch of bad things against them, but let's just say my dad didn't have it easy. But when it came time for raising myself and my sister, they decided not to do corporal punishment, which of course was a big part of his life growing up. He did it to me once, and then they decided, you know what, that's just not how we're going to do it. And they never did it again. They never did it to my sister, and they only did it the one time to me. And I do remember it. It's quite horrifying, and I can't believe that there are people who had to live under the threat of that throughout their growing up ages. But it did happen once, and and then it didn't happen after that. But basically, and then they just did the best they could with, learning how to raise children in a way that they weren't necessarily taught themselves. And that's remarkable. They're not particularly, there's nothing spectacularly unusual about, how they both have college educations, but, but you wouldn't, it's not like they live up in the clouds or anything. They're very straightforward people, and they just figured it out. They just figured out a way to raise myself and my sister in a way that did not, after that, involve physical punishment. Instead, they tried other methods, and that were less damaging. And I personally, I appreciate that. I'm going to miss a lot about my dad. I really miss how he, like, he had a love of like building things and doing things hands-on that part of me wishes I had, but I simply don't have. He not only did he half build the house, that we lived in, but, he worked on cars. He would fix things when they broke, all kinds of stuff like that. And that's a quality that I wish I had. And he kind of tried to help get me interested in it, but it just never really took. I was always more of a book type, and growing up, and I still am of that type, although I've followed the technology, and I'm I'm a computer type, rather than a book type strictly nowadays. But I'm gonna miss his kindness. I'm gonna miss just his the way, like, I'm very fortunate in another way, in that when I grew up, it was with parents who deeply loved each other, knew it, also expressed it, like didn't try to hide it. They would say "I love you," they would hug, that sort of thing. They were not afraid to express emotions, and it really gave me a good example. It's my new wife texting me, of what a marriage could look like. And I, my first marriage until I was widowed, I feel like a lot of the good parts of that marriage were because I had that example. And I believe that the good parts of my current relationship now, my current marriage, are also from that. And so I have a lot to thank him for. I'm really, because of my dad, and it's still, part of me, I don't think, has really let this sink in, that he is truly gone. But even though it's been a week, and even though I've been talking about it, with my family and thinking about it every day, it still feels very weird. But these things, like, if I learned anything from my own wife dying, it's like, you never know how the emotions are going to come with this sort of thing, and it's just, you just get through it. Anyway, I do also feel like part of the fun I'm having in my current marriage and relationship is from seeing my dad, and how he was with my mom, and how he treated her, how she treated him, and what they did, together, both in terms of building a life and building a relationship, but, having things that they did together, having things they did separately. Some of their hobbies, were of course separate, so, and like, I'm helping my wife with her house right now, because she needs a room painted, so we're painting it together, and it feels very much like something my parents would have done. So I really do miss my dad. I've lived a pretty good long life. I just turned 50, as you know, from my episode 3 episodes ago, turning 50. Managed to get a level age 50 with both parents, and not everyone gets that. My son, of course, didn't get that. Not everyone does. And he led a great life, and he was a wonderful person. So I'm going to move forward. I'm going to see, I'm going to love my wife as deeply as I know how, which is the way he knew and the way he taught me by example. And she's a wonderful woman who deserves it. And I really hope that we live a good long time, because we know that that doesn't always happen. But with any luck, it will. And I hope everyone has someone there in their life. If it wasn't their dad, maybe another parent or grandparent or other close relative, or even a close friend or a mentor or something, who can teach you some of the things that my dad taught me about being able to love someone, about being able to recognize flaws in how things were done with you, and then fix them and do better. It's an amazing thing. So thank you, Dad. And I love you, Gemma. And this has been a crazy week with both of those things happening. And I hope... Anyway, I hope. Thank you for listening. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, CryptoBiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thank you for listening. Words and music, copyright 2020, CryptoBiography, LLC, all rights reserved. Thank you.